Hi, welcome to Cuddles and Milk Petaluma. I'm happy to see you today. I missed last week. I was out of town. I wasn't able to today. So today we're going to pick up where we left off on a breastfeeding journey. Okay, so if you've been following my videos, I've been doing a breastfeeding journey from kind of a pre-delivery time all the way out. Right now, we are just going to talk about kind of like the first month or two today, but we will be going all the way through weaning in the toddler years. So kind of like a typical journey, although I'm going to add in kind of a lot of things that could happen, and hopefully they wouldn't all happen to one person. But today is episode 6. Okay, so we're talking about establishing a full supply. All right, so what does a full supply mean? Let's start there. So a full supply means that you have enough milk for your baby, whatever they need. So if your baby is taking 20 ounces a day, you're making 20 ounces a day. If they are exclusive breastfeeding, it means you're making enough that they're gaining weight and they're not needing anything else, right? So that might be a little different for everybody, and it'll change throughout your child's age and throughout their breastfeeding experience. But for today, we're going to talk about that, establishing a full supply. So we're out past the first couple of weeks, right? We're now at a point where breastfeeding is easier. And let's talk about how do you kind of establish and then maintain this supply? So one of the first things to realize is that supply and demand is really important, okay? That is very crucial. So the way your breast milk is made initially is hormones, but also supply and demand. So if you think about it initially as baby's born, this much is hormones and this much is supply and demand, then they switch. And by a couple of months, this much is supply and demand and only this much is hormones. Okay, so initially for many women, even if they don't have a baby emptying very well, let's say baby is either sleepy or has tongue issues or isn't going to the breast often enough, a lot of women might still have a great supply because their hormones are doing what they're supposed to do, and their brain and their pituitary is telling their body, hey, make milk. But you do that too long, you do that a couple of months, and what's going to happen is if we're not really emptying the breast, we're going to stop making a good supply. So supply and demand becomes really important. By a couple of months, we should get to that point where we have the baby really emptying the breast better. You're never going to feel empty, okay? You're never going to feel like all the milk's gone. That's totally fine and normal. You could have anywhere from a half to a full feed after baby's done, and that's fine. Okay, because it helps when you have those cluster feeds, when baby's really sick or fussy and they're nursing all afternoon, it helps a lot, okay? So that's the first thing to remember is supply and demand becomes even more important than it was in the first couple of weeks. So if baby doesn't demand it, your body's not going to make it. So getting that milk emptied is very important. The second thing is the nighttime feeds. Frequently, I will hear from a mom of maybe a 6 to 8 week old, maybe even, a 2 to 3 month old, they'll be saying, hey, baby is eating really well, gaining really well. So we're going to start letting baby sleep through the night and drop those nighttime feeds. And sometimes I catch them beforehand and we have a chance to talk about it. Other times I'll get somebody who just reaches out and they're like, hey, my milk supply really dropped and I'm not sure why. And when I talk more to them, I can hear and understand that what happened was a few weeks ago, they dropped their nighttime feeds. So we all want sleep, okay? We all thrive on it. You are healthier and happier with sleep and more sane, okay? I'm a big proponent of sleep. Not going to tell you not to. However, if baby is dropping their nighttime feeds a little early before they're totally ready, especially if they're bottle-fed baby and you're not getting that breast stimulation and you're going 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours at night in those first couple of months, you're going to affect your supply, okay? And as a side note on that, I will tell you too that breastfeeding can be as effective as the pill in the first 6 months of life for birth control. However, you have to be breastfeeding around the clock, not doing bottles, and having a nighttime pump. A nighttime breastfeed, not pump. The reason that's so important is feeding at night really changes your hormones, okay? That's super, super important. Excuse me. So it really helps those hormones. And that's when they're at their lowest at night, and it brings those hormone levels back up. You really need that. Okay. So finding a way of managing those nighttime feeds. A lot of times they can be done with minimal disrupt to your sleep if you've got baby in a co-sleeper or in the room with you, or maybe even in your bed, right? That nighttime feed can happen and you don't have to be up sitting in a chair like I am. I wouldn't turn on all the lights and be up and out of the bed. Do it easy, but baby does need that nighttime feed, and so do you, until baby is around usually about 4 months, 14 pounds. Okay. And the last thing that's really helpful for establishing and maintaining a full supply, I would say, is that latch and how many times you're breastfeeding on each side. Okay, so what I'm talking about here is if baby doesn't have a good latch, right? For a lot of moms, it'll be really painful and super noticeable if baby doesn't have a good latch, but not for all. For some moms, they're like, it's fine, it's not that painful. And yet baby doesn't have a great latch. They're not emptying the breast well. This goes back to that supply and demand. If we don't have a deep latch, then we're not going to empty the breast well enough. So what happens is if this is the breast and this is baby's mouth, if baby's out here on the nipple, we're not compressing the back part. We're not compressing these, the Montgomery glands and the ducts and everything back here that needs to happen. Okay, so instead we're right here, usually causing pain also. When we take this big latch and we're compressing back here, those Montgomery glands and the ducts and all this stuff back here is meant to open and close. And the more it does that, the more milk comes out down to the nipple. Okay, so that's really important. That's what we need for that deep latch. That's how that relates to supply and demand, because then baby gets out a lot more food. The other thing is, are you nursing on both sides or one side of the feed? So some babies are very efficient nursers. They can feed one side at a feed, be done in 5 minutes, have gotten 5 ounces and be done. That's fantastic, fine. But if you're struggling with your supply or you need to increase it, you don't want to feed on just one side at a time. Because let's say you do, the right side now, and then 3 hours later you do the left. Instead of each breast getting 8 stimulations a day, now they're only getting 4. Okay, so that means it's only 4 times a day that you're emptying and refilling the milk. And that's really crucial for those hormones. But also what happens is there's something called a feedback inhibitor. What that means is basically after about 3 to 4 hours, the milk's sitting in the breast and your body starts to slow down. It's kind of like if you imagine this assembly line, right? And you've got all these little things coming down the assembly line and they're getting jammed up. Nobody's taking them off, right? So you've got like a whole conveyor belt full of this product, whatever it is. You have to tell them to stop putting it out, slow it down. That's what happens in your body. So what happens is if you aren't emptying that breast, it will just slow down production after about 4 hours. Okay. So that's part of why the one side at a feed can actually decrease your production. Okay. And like I said, for some babies, it works. It's normal. They're gaining, they're emptying well. It's fine. It isn't for everyone. But if you're struggling with your supply, if you're trying to increase, you need to be doing both sides at every feed. Even if it's 20 minutes here and 2 minutes here, then the next time it would be 20 minutes here and 2 minutes there. So we need to rotate it like that, but you need that breastfeeding on both sides to increase your supply. Okay, so let's do a quick review. To maintain a full supply, the 3 little tips I had today were supply and demand, how that really transitions after the first month or so from hormones to really emptying of the breast, the importance of nighttime feeds and how that really does affect your hormone levels, your supply, what you're going to make and how much you're going to have. And lastly, the deep latch and feeding on both sides. Okay, those are kind of the 3 big tips and ways that you can maintain a full supply. All right, so thank you so much for joining me today at Cuddles and Milk and Petaluma. I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment on Facebook. I have a list of these on YouTube. I'm also on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. Ask me questions. Tell me what you'd like to see me address next time, and maybe I will be able to answer your question in the next video. Wouldn't that be great? All right, so you can find me at www.cuddlesandmilk.com. or Cuddles and Milk Petaluma at Facebook and Instagram. Great to see you. Thanks so much for joining.